Okay, just a quick video on paper 2. So paper 1 was Thursday. So a pretty positive response from my students, so that's good. So what I wanted to focus on is what the specification is for paper 2 and just some areas which you might want to look out for. There's no way of predicting exactly what the paper is going to be, but there are some topic areas which may come up and there's some areas to focus on. First thing, you do need to copy the specification. I'm showing the sections here that are on paper 2. So if you don't have a specification, you can get it on the AQA website or just ask your teacher and get one. But what I'm going to do is show the bits that overlap between paper 1 and paper 2, some bits which haven't come up already, and just some hints on paper 2 specific topics. So if we look at the top, first item is the role and responsibilities of accountants. Now that actually came up surprisingly in a 25-mark essay this year. I haven't read the paper, just got feedback from students. Sounds like an interesting question. That doesn't mean it won't come up in paper 2. One thing I would say is you've never had a question on the roles of an auditor, so internal and external auditor. So definitely make sure that you could explain some roles and responsibilities of those particular roles, but it's a good chance that those won't come up. 3.2 types of business organisation, which also includes source of finance. So not a huge amount on that from what I can gather on paper 1. A little bit of debenture interest calculations. So you could have an essay question with sources of finance ownership. Personally feel it's unlikely, but it's definitely not impossible. There's a lot of essay types that are specific to paper 2, which means they don't really need to change into a like sources of finance, LTD or anything like that. But still be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of the different ownership types and the different sources of finances, because they could ask you those individually. 3.3, the double entry model, covers a lot of ground and not a huge amount of it was covered on paper 1, as in there weren't any individual ledger account questions on the provision for doubtful debts, accruals and prepayments for income or expenditure. Disposals was a little bit of mention of disposals in the non-current assets question, I believe, but they could have a T account on any of those. So whereas I always say you want to focus more so on the paper 2 specific topics, because I'm assuming you've got yourself all ready for paper 1, you do want to make sure you can brush up on your provision for doubtful debts, accruals, disposals, just in case they do come up. Also, whilst final accounts specifically, so 3.6 is sole traders, 3.7 is limited company, 3.15 is partnerships, none of them are coming up. They can ask you to complete a subsection of one of the accounts if you look in the 3.3 double entry model. So just being aware of doing a section for current assets, section for non-current assets, that type of thing could come up. But if I'm going to pick on one particular area, like I say, it's the provision for doubtful debts, accruals. They've come up a few times on paper 2. The accruals have anyway. Provision for doubtful debts and disposals definitely up there as well. 3.8, analysis and evaluation of financial information. We're looking at ratio analysis and an essay on that. Obviously, there has been an investor ratio essay this year, which has been due. Hasn't been one for a couple of years. They can double up in ratio essays. Ratio is such a massive part of accounting, but equally the calculations and formulas for these, you can have a multiple choice question or standalone calculation questions on any of those, so make sure you're aware. So they're all overlaps on what you would say would be first year topics that could be on paper 1 or paper 2. Missed out 3.4, so verification, don't worry about bank recs, control accounts, correcting errors, that's gone. 3.5, accounting concepts is gone, but bringing in the concepts into your written responses still helps strengthen your answers. 3.6, preparing sole trader accounts. 3.7, preparing limited company accounts, both gone. 3.9 is a paper 2 specific topic, so you've got budgeting. Just a couple things to be aware of there. So last year you were asked to explain 2 benefits of incremental budgeting. A large proportion of the cohort didn't understand what incremental budgeting was, so you could be asked incremental or zero-based budgeting. Make sure you're aware of what they mean and some benefits and drawbacks of both. Make sure you can prepare the different types of budget. So you've got labour budget, which came up last year as a 4-marker, dream of a question to be honest. Sales budget, unlikely, not a huge amount they can do with it, but they could. Purchases budget, and you can also have a cash budget. So the cash budget would be a little bit more involved and hasn't come up for a little bit, so I think cash budget is a good shout. So make sure you know the layout and all the labeling for the cash budget and how to work out when payments would be received or made, and make sure also that you can explain a couple benefits or a couple limitations to the different budgets, because quite often it's prepare the budget, then explain the benefits and drawbacks of them. So budgeting will come up in some form. no doubt about it. So just make sure you're aware of the key rules, the key purposes of budgeting, and the layouts of the different ones. 3.10, marginal costing, is quite a big area. So you need to be able to define the different types of cost. You could get asked that. So what's direct cost, indirect cost, variable, fixed, semi-variable, marginal cost. So you need to know the different costing, stepped cost as well. Break-even analysis. A couple of years ago, they had a nice, what I thought was nice 10-mark interpretation of the break-even chart and calculations based on that. There's nothing to stop them doing that again, or individual calculations on break-even, contribution, margin safety. So make sure you're aware of that. Equally, benefits and limitations of break-even. Make sure you know 2 of each and can explain those with examples. That could link into a question. But also within the marginal costing section, you've also got decision making. So you've got 3 different essay types there: make or buy, which came up in 2023, additional orders and closures. Personally, that's one of my calls, is that there is the potential for an essay in one of those 2 areas. Also within 3.10 is dealing with scarce resources and target profit. They haven't come up that often, especially scarce resources, which came up in 2019 and hasn't come up since. I've done a quick video on the question for 2019. Definitely think that's due, and that could well be one of the big areas for this year. So 3.10, marginal costing, has got quite a lot of area and definitely something to focus on, but could be an essay, could be numerical, could be a number of things. 3.11 is standard costing and variance analysis. Variance analysis is a huge area, should be coming up every year really. So last year you had material, labour variances and cost reconciliations with a linked 6-mark written question, so 20 marks. You'd be surprised about the proportion of the country who didn't answer that question. So you need to get yourself ready on variances. There's so many different ways they could assess it. They could just do the same questions last year, or similar questions, same but similar questions last year, with material, labour, cost reconciliation. They did do an essay 2 years ago, so it's a 25-mark essay in 2023. Personally, I think you could be getting some sales variances because they haven't come up for a little while, and then potentially linking that to a profit reconciliation, just purely because they've not been assessed that much. So just make sure you know all of the different variances, and also you can explain what they mean. So a 6-marker or even a 25-marker is going to be about interpreting what they mean and how they link, who's responsible, what decisions a business would make. So understanding the standards, costing elements of how you set a standard, and what weaknesses there could be is also very important. Costing methods, so 3.12, absorption activity-based costing. It does really link into marginal costing that as well. So looking at the benefits and drawbacks of the different costing methods. Now there was a fairly tough costing methods essay last year that a lot of students did not perform well in because they weren't prepped for it. Make sure you know the benefits and drawbacks of marginal, absorption, activity-based costing if there's an essay or 6-marker. But because there was that last year, is it going to be more focused on an absorption costing income statement or a marginal costing income statement? Make sure you know the layout so you can complete both of those. Activity-based costing hasn't come up that often. It was part of a 25-marker. I think it was 2021 or 2022. It's definitely due, so you can have a numerical question on that. But there's lots of elements to absorption costing which haven't been assessed. So looking at allocation and apportionment of overheads, reallocation of support centre overheads into production centres, that's not come up at all. Calculating budget and overhead absorption rates, calculating under or over absorption, there's lots of scope there with absorption activity-based costing, so try and make sure you can deal with each of those and explain the different methods. 3.13 is investment appraisal, net present value, payback period, has come up 2 years in a row numerically. Similar questions as well. So you've got to think that from a numerical basis, that's not going to come up this year. Can't guarantee it though. But it hasn't been an essay for a few years, and it's a stock essay, isn't it? An investment appraisal essay, looking at financial and non-financial factors to decide what business should do. So understanding the benefits and drawbacks of net present value and payback period and how you can use those in an essay is really important. Make sure you brush up on your calculations on the off chance it does come in. But for me, 2 years in a row, 2 20-mark sections of the papers, it's going to be varied this year, surely. 3.17, so what we're looking at here is investor ratios, computerized accounting. that's kind of come up in both essays of paper one. So the investor ratios essay came in the second one. The first one had a little bit of an element of computerized accounting, from what I can gather. But one of the choices you would bring in a computerized system. You would assume that means it's not going to come up in paper two, but it's definitely not a guarantee. So just making sure you've reviewed them, especially the formulas of investor ratios, even though there were calculations in paper one, doesn't stop throwing in even a multiple choice question. How do you calculate dividend cover, for instance? So yeah, 3.17, whilst it's been assessed, it still could be a little bit again. And then finally, 3.18, ethics. No major links to ethics in paper one. A couple of my students did reference paper one. Sorry, the first essay bringing in some ethical considerations due to people completing work they weren't qualified to do, and professional competence and due care, which is a great shout. Doesn't have to be in there, I'm sure, but definitely strengthen it, bring in the wider context. But the lack of a specific essay on ethics does mean it could come up in paper two. Lots of essay types on paper two, though. So you, just to recap on the ones I've mentioned, you've got ethics, still potential for investor ratios, computerized accounts, investment appraisal, costing methods could still come up as another essay, absorption activity-based marginal, variance analysis, make or buy, closures, additional orders. You can have a budgeting-based essay as well, or just a normal ratios, source of funds, lots of scope. Like I've said, the ones I think, investment appraisal, additional orders, or closures, I think there is scope for a variance analysis essay, but we don't know. So just make sure you can review the key points, look through past paper questions, prepare some ideas for those essays, because that's going to, they have their themes, that's going to help prepare you. Most essay types have come up. There's always the chance for that holistic synoptic style essay like you've had this year on the role of an accountant, which just means it's your general knowledge of accounting and the revision you've made over the 2 years helps you to address the question. Well, good luck.